I was 24 when the lock on our front door changed. It clicked shut on everything I thought would always be mine. My childhood, my memories, and a small blue bedroom that still smelled like vanilla and paint. The new owners had moved in only hours after the closing. A young couple, bright smiles, golden retriever. They waved when they saw me on the curb, the way polite strangers do when they don't realize they're waving at a ghost. Mom had told me not to come by. "It'll just make you sad, Claire," she'd said over the phone, her voice soft but final. We had to do it. You know your brother needed the money. I knew. I just didn't believe it. Our house wasn't just a structure. It was a scrapbook. Dad built the porch himself the summer before my senior year. I carved my initials into the underside of the railing and swore I'd never leave. When I left for college, I thought it would wait for me. But life has a way of erasing the things you don't protect. It started with my brother, Alex. He was the kind of golden boy small towns adore, the quarterback, the charmer, the one everyone said would make it. Except he didn't. 2 years after college, he'd racked up gambling debts and business loans that collapsed faster than his confidence. Mom said he just needed a little help. Dad said family came first, so they refinanced the house once. Then again. And when the third loan defaulted, the decision came quietly. Sell the house. Pay the debt. Save the son. No one asked me. They just told me after the papers were signed. I stood in the driveway that day holding a ring of useless keys. The for sale sign had already been replaced with one that said sold in red letters so bright they hurt my eyes. I remember running my hand along the mailbox, white paint chipped, the same one I'd painted for Father's Day when I was 12. It still had our last name on it, Andrews. I traced the letters slowly until I reached the S. The edge cut my finger. I didn't even flinch. The sting felt honest. When I confronted them, they looked almost relieved, as if my anger confirmed. They were still good parents, because guilt requires someone to witness it. Dad said, "You'll understand someday, Claire. Family is about sacrifice." I said, "Whose?" He didn't answer. Mom cried. Alex stood behind them, silent, avoiding my eyes, as if shame could make him invisible. That was the last time we stood in that living room together. After they moved into a smaller rental across town, I stopped visiting for a while. I threw myself into work, real estate of all things. Maybe because I wanted control over the thing that had been taken from me. Maybe because ownership felt like safety. I started as an assistant at a local property firm. Coffee runs, listings, paperwork. But every time I walked through a house, I saw opportunity in the walls. I learned how to read land deeds the way other people read love letters. Within a year, I had my license. Within 2, I'd closed enough deals to go solo. I told myself it was just business, but every "congratulations on your new home" felt like a small act of reclamation. Still, some nights I'd drive past Maple Street. I'd park across from our old porch with the headlights off, just to see if the new family had kept the lilac bush. They had. It had grown taller. And I'd sit there, hands on the steering wheel, whispering, "It used to be mine." I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. Anger burns fast. Loss lingers quietly. 3 years later, a letter arrived from a bank I didn't recognize. It was addressed to my parents, but delivered to my office. Inside was a notice of default, on the mortgage for the rental house they'd moved into. Alex had borrowed against it. Again. And they'd co-signed. Again. When I called Mom, she sounded tired, not even surprised. "Your father didn't want to tell you," she said. "We thought we could handle it." I sat at my desk surrounded by closing files and open contracts. All I could think was how history repeats when you don't change the blueprint. That night, I looked up the property records for every house on Maple Street. 7 total, 4 privately owned, 3 in foreclosure. I stared at those listings like coordinates on a map back home. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: clarity. It started small. One purchase, then another, a duplex, a corner house, a plot no one thought was worth anything. I didn't tell anyone, not even my parents. Every signature on every deed felt like sewing a piece of my heart back together. Every welcome home I handed to someone else felt like rewriting the past in a language only I could read. And when I finally bought the blue-trimmed bungalow 2 doors down from my old house, I parked out front again. Only this time, I didn't cry. I just whispered, almost. By 29, my business had grown faster than I could have imagined. People started calling me the woman who rebuilt Maple Street. But they didn't know why that street mattered. They saw ambition. I saw redemption, measured in square footage. When the last house on the block came up for sale, the one with the white porch and the initials still carved beneath the railing, I didn't hesitate. I signed before sunset. The next morning, I drove back, stood in the driveway, and watched the sun hit the windows the way it used to when I was a kid. I wasn't the same person who'd lost this house. I was the woman who'd learned to build something that couldn't be taken again. That's when my phone rang. Mom, her voice trembled. Claire, we're being evicted. The bank took the house. I closed my eyes. The rental, of course, she whispered. We don't know where to go. And I said quietly, I might have an idea. That's where the real story began. Not with loss, but with choice. The choice to forgive without forgetting. To rebuild without erasing. To own not as revenge, but as release. And maybe, just maybe, to teach them what home really means. When I told Mom I might have an idea, she thought I meant a favor. What I meant was a reckoning. 2 days later, they showed up at my office, tired, smaller somehow. Dad's suit didn't fit anymore. The sleeves swallowed his wrists. Mom held a worn purse like a lifeline. And Alex... Well, Alex wasn't there. I didn't ask why. I already knew. They sat across from me while I poured coffee, the same kind they used to brew every Sunday morning when life was still simple. It's nice here, Mom said softly, looking around the office. You've done well for yourself. It wasn't a compliment. It was a confession. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother told you what happened. We didn't expect, well, this. This, meaning foreclosure, eviction, the sound of consequences finally finding a home. I leaned back in my chair. You need somewhere to stay. Mom nodded. Just for a while, until we figure things out. I looked at her, the woman who once told me, a house is just walls, when she sold the one that built me. And now those same walls had turned against her. Later that night, I drove them to Maple Street. Mom sat in the passenger seat, quiet, tracing the edge of her seatbelt like it might hold her together. Dad watched the houses roll by, not realizing half of them had my name on the deeds. When I pulled up in front of the white porch, our old porch, Mom gasped. Oh, Claire, you brought us here? I smiled faintly. Something like that. The house looked the same. Fresh paint, new mailbox, warm light from inside. But it wasn't theirs anymore. I stopped the car and turned to them. This is your stop, Dad frowned. What do you mean? I bought it, I said quietly. The house. A few months ago. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to bend time. Mom blinked like she hadn't heard me right. You bought this house? I nodded. And the ones next door. And the ones across the street? I looked straight at her. I own this block now. She pressed a hand to her chest. Claire, why? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. Because someone once told me family is about sacrifice. I just decided to redefine what that means, Dad's voice cracked. So what, you're rubbing it in? You want to humiliate us? No, I said softly. I want you to understand the price of your choices. He opened his mouth, but no words came. And then I added, "You can stay here, rent-free, for 6 months. After that, you'll need to pay like everyone else." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "You'd charge us rent?" I looked out the window toward the mailbox, freshly painted white, the same as before. Everyone pays for what they take for granted. I just learned how to collect interest. For weeks, they lived there quietly. I didn't visit. I didn't call. I told the property manager to handle everything through formal channels. Business was business. But I still drove past sometimes, late at night when the street was quiet. The curtains were different, the flowers gone, but I could still see the outline of who we used to be. One evening, I saw Dad on the porch. He was sitting exactly where I used to sit, drinking from a chipped mug. I wondered if he realized the irony, that he was now a tenant on land he once owned. The first crack came in the form of a voicemail. It was Alex. "Claire, I know you hate me, but I'm in trouble again. I just need a loan. Just this once." His voice was unsteady, rehearsed. The same rhythm he used when he wanted something. I deleted it before it finished. Then I sat there in my office, staring at the blinking red light on the phone. Hate. That's what he thought this was about. But hate is loud and short-lived. What I felt was quieter, like a scar that doesn't hurt until someone touches it. A few days later, Mom came to see me. She looked thinner, older. "Claire," she said gently, "your brother's struggling." "He needs help," I set down my pen. "And you want me to save him again?" She sighed. "He's family." That word again. Family. Used like a key to open every locked door. I leaned forward. "Do you remember when I was 24 and you sold my home to pay for his debt? You said I'd understand when I had real responsibilities." Her eyes glistened. "I do remember." "Then you'll understand this too." I handed her a check, not for Alex, but for her. 6 months' rent covered. After that, the terms don't change. She hesitated. "You're not the same girl you used to be." I smiled faintly. "Neither are you." When she left, I sat there for a long time, staring at the skyline through the office window. The city looked different from this height, cleaner, almost forgiving. But memory doesn't fade just because you rise above it. That night, I found myself walking the old block again, slowly, like a ritual. The houses glowed softly under the streetlights. Each one carried a story, a family, a dream, a debt. I reached the end of the street and turned around. Every mailbox, every porch light, every welcome mat, all under my ownership. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel proud. I felt empty. Because revenge disguised as redemption still leaves a shadow. A month later, I got another call from the property manager. "Your tenants at 112 Maple missed their payment," he said. I frowned. "That's my parents' place. They're not supposed to be paying." "I know. But they insisted on sending something. A check." When I picked it up from the office, I turned it over and froze. It wasn't a real check. It was a folded piece of notebook paper. Inside were 5 handwritten words in my father's handwriting. "We're paying for what we took." I sat there motionless for a long time. Then, for the first time since I'd bought the house, I cried, not from anger, but release, because maybe they finally understood. Not the money, not the loss, but the weight of their choices. 2 weeks later, the news came quietly. Alex had left town. No goodbye, no apology, just silence, Mom called to tell me. She sounded lighter, almost relieved. "Your father's thinking of selling what little we have left," she said. "Maybe start over somewhere small." I hesitated. "You could stay here, you know. The street isn't just mine. It's ours if you want it to be." She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "Only if you visit sometimes." I laughed quietly. "I might surprise you." That night, I walked back to the porch. The air smelled like rain and lilacs, the same as the night before the house was sold years ago. I stood there, touching the railing where my initials were still faintly carved into the wood. And I realized home wasn't about the deed or the title. It was about finally standing somewhere you chose, not somewhere you were placed. And in that moment, I didn't feel like the girl who lost everything. I felt like the woman who built something better. The day everything shifted didn't start with fireworks. It started with silence. I woke up in my apartment, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and realized I hadn't thought about Maple Street in weeks. Not the old porch. Not the house. Not even the debts. I was free, at least in theory. But freedom feels strange when you've spent your whole life fighting for it. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and stared at the list of properties on my screen. 53 homes, 12 commercial lots, 2 apartment buildings. My name sat on every deed like an echo. From the outside, it looked like victory. But inside, it felt more like maintenance, as if I was constantly holding together something that could crumble at any second. That morning, I got an email that changed everything. Subject: Partnership Opportunity, Vance Realty Group. I froze. Vance Realty Group. One of the same companies that once refused to hire me because, in their words, I was too emotionally invested in clients to make hard calls. The CEO back then, Harold Vance, had told me during my interview, "You have passion, Claire, but passion clouds logic. You'll burn out in this business." He'd been wrong about me. But he'd been right about one thing. Passion did fuel me. It just didn't burn me. It built me. Now, years later, his company was the one reaching out. They wanted to meet to discuss a potential acquisition, mine of them. I stared at the email for a full minute before laughing softly. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor. When I walked into their boardroom a week later, the air was thick with quiet discomfort. Harold was there, older now, gray hair, the same expensive watch. He didn't recognize me at first. "Claire Andrews," I said, extending a hand. He blinked, the name sparking something. "Andrews, the one from the emotional one," I finished for him, smiling. "Looks like I learned to manage it." His face flushed slightly. Then professionalism returned. "You've done impressive work. Your Maple Street project caught our attention." I sat down. "You mean the one no one believed in?" He coughed. "It's unconventional." "So was selling my childhood home," I said softly. "But that turned out all right, too." He didn't respond, but I saw his jaw tighten. The deal went through 2 months later. Not only did I acquire Vance Realty Group, I rebranded it Andrews Collective. A name that used to feel like a wound now became a brand. Clean, simple, powerful. We didn't sell houses. We built stability. Every project came with community gardens, shared childcare programs, and financial literacy workshops. We weren't just changing the skyline. We were changing what ownership meant. People called it radical. I called it personal. Because when you've watched a family lose everything to one bad signature, you understand the weight of paper. The press started calling me the woman who bought her street back. Interviews followed. Podcasts, keynote invitations. One morning, I was invited to speak at a real estate ethics summit. The same one my father used to watch on TV while making notes he never used. I almost said no. Then I thought of him, of the way his hands used to shake when signing papers that never helped him. So I said yes. When I stood on that stage, under the warm lights, something shifted inside me. I wasn't speaking as the hurt daughter anymore. I was speaking as the woman who'd built something from that hurt. I grew up believing a home was a reward, I told the crowd. But it's not. It's a responsibility to protect, to preserve, and to never forget what it costs to lose one. The audience was silent. Then someone stood and clapped. And soon, the room followed. It wasn't applause that moved me. It was the realization that my pain had found purpose. Afterward, a woman in her 50s came up to me, tears in her eyes. "My daughter and I lost our home last year," she said. "Listening to you made me believe we could start again." I held her hand. "You can? You already have." That night, I sat in my car and cried quietly, not from sadness, but relief. For the first time, the past didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a foundation. Weeks later, I visited my parents again. This time unannounced. The house looked different, softer somehow. Mom had planted lilacs again just like before. Dad was on the porch reading a newspaper. When he saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to something I hadn't seen in years. Pride. He stood up slowly. "Claire," I smiled. "Hey, Dad," he gestured toward the chair beside him. "Sit for a minute." We sat in silence, the same way we used to on late summer evenings when words weren't necessary. Finally, he said, "Your mom tells me you bought a big company." "Something like that," I said. He nodded slowly. "You always had a vision. I just didn't see it." I looked at him. The man who once thought saving one child meant sacrificing the other. "Maybe now you do," he sighed. "We made mistakes. Everyone does. Some can't be undone." I shook my head. "No, but they can be understood." He looked away, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Claire." For a long time, I'd imagined that apology. I thought it would feel like closure. Instead, it just felt human. I reached over and took his hand. "I know," I said softly. "Me too." When I left that night, the porch light followed me to the car. As I drove down the street, I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. All the mailboxes. Each one different, but all freshly painted, cared for. That was the thing about Maple Street now. It wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to people who believed in rebuilding. I rolled down the window, breathing in the smell of rain and lilacs again. The same scent that used to make me ache now just made me feel alive. That was the turning point. Not the day I bought the house. Not the day I bought the company. But the day I stopped needing anyone to lose for me to win, because revenge fades. But peace. Peace multiplies. And as I looked back at the street that built me, I realized I hadn't just rewritten the past. I'd rewritten my family's name. Success has a strange sound to it. It's not applause, not money hitting your account, not even the flash of your name in an article headline. It's quieter. It sounds like breathing again after years of holding your breath. For me, that sound came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in the new Andrews Collective headquarters, a converted textile factory turned glass and brick marvel in the heart of downtown. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, warming the concrete floors. Everything about that space felt deliberate, honest, earned. We had just closed our biggest project yet, a multi-unit housing development focused on affordable ownership. We called it Haven Row, because for once I wanted the homes we built to live up to their name. As the blueprint spread across the table, my team buzzed around me. Architects, designers, social workers, even a few families giving feedback on what home meant to them. I watched, quietly smiling. Years ago, I was the girl no one asked for input. Now my name was on the walls, not as a reminder of ego, but as proof that emotional intelligence wasn't a weakness. It was the backbone of what we built. "Claire," my operations manager said, pulling me from my thoughts. "We got final approval from the city. You're officially breaking ground next week." I nodded. "Then let's make it count." That night, I stayed late after everyone left. The hum of the empty building reminded me of late nights studying listings, dreaming of something like this. I walked over to the glass wall overlooking the skyline, every twinkling window out there a story I'd once envied. Now I realized most of those people were just trying to keep the lights on too. I pressed my palm to the glass. "Let's build something no one can take away again," I whispered to the reflection staring back. The next few months moved like a movie montage. Groundbreaking ceremonies, newspaper interviews, podcast invites. But the work itself, that's what mattered. Every house on Haven Row came with solar panels, shared gardens, and rent-to-own options. We built not for profit margins, but permanence. The kind I never had. I spent weekends at the site, talking to the families, watching kids run barefoot on fresh-cut grass. One afternoon, a little girl ran up to me with a flower crown. "Are you the lady who makes the homes?" she asked. I laughed. "Something like that." She placed the crown on my head. "Then you should have a house too." It was such a small moment, but it hit me harder than any award could, because for the first time, I realized I wasn't just building homes. I was giving people what I lost. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived at my desk. Plain, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "You've done well, Claire. Better than I ever imagined. I'm proud of you." Dad, no apology this time. No guilt, just pride. And somehow, that simple sentence meant more than anything he'd ever said. I folded the note carefully and placed it inside the first folder I ever used when I started my solo business, the one with coffee stains and bent corners. It reminded me where I began and how far I'd come. As the company grew, I started getting calls from other developers, people who wanted to partner, to modernize their image. Some offers were flattering, others were laughable. But one name stopped me cold: Alex. He had apparently started a real estate venture on the East Coast. At least that's what his assistant claimed when she called. He wanted to meet. I didn't answer right away. The idea of seeing him again stirred something old, fragile. Anger, sadness, curiosity, all of it. Finally, I replied with 2 words: "Let's talk." We met at a cafe downtown, neutral territory. He was thinner, older, but still carried that same confident charm that used to fool everyone, including me. "Claire," he said, smiling. "You look successful." "I am," I said evenly. "You look persistent." He laughed awkwardly, realizing I wasn't here for nostalgia. "I've been watching what you've built," he said. "It's incredible. I mean, you really did it. You turned everything around." "I didn't turn it around," I said quietly. "I rebuilt it." He leaned forward. "I'm trying to do the same. I was wondering if you'd consider—" "No," I interrupted. He blinked. "You don't even know what I'm asking." "I know," I said. "And the answer is still no," he sighed. "You really can't forgive me, can you?" I looked at him carefully. "You think forgiveness is a transaction. It's not. It's a decision. And I already made mine. I just didn't announce it." He frowned. "Meaning what?" "Meaning I stopped letting what you did define who I am." He sat back, silent. For once, Alex had nothing to sell. After he left, I stayed a while longer, stirring my coffee as the cafe emptied. There was no satisfaction in rejecting him, just peace. And that was new. I walked out into the golden afternoon, feeling the warmth on my skin. For the first time, my success didn't feel like revenge. It felt like closure. Months later, Haven Row officially opened. Families moved in, laughter spilled from windows, and life began to hum again. We held a small ceremony on the lawn. Reporters came, cameras flashed, but I barely noticed them. All I saw were faces, real people starting again. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't use the script. I looked at the crowd and said, "Years ago, someone told me that home is just walls. But I've learned that home is a promise, that we can lose everything and still rebuild stronger." A soft hush swept through the crowd. Then applause. Mom stood near the back, clapping through tears. Dad had his arm around her. They looked smaller than I remembered, but somehow more complete. And as I stepped off the stage, Mom hugged me tight. "Claire," she whispered, "you gave us back more than a house. You gave us grace." I closed my eyes. And for once, I didn't feel like the daughter left behind. I felt like the woman who led them home. That night, I drove back to Maple Street. The lilacs were blooming again. The porch light glowed warm against the dark sky. I parked the car, got out, and walked to the railing, the one with my initials still carved underneath. I traced them with my finger, smiling. This time the cut didn't sting. It reminded me I was alive. I whispered to the night, "I rebuilt what you broke." And in that still moment, With the wind moving through the trees and the smell of lilacs wrapping around me, I finally believed it. Forgiveness doesn't come like thunder. It comes like rain, slow, unexpected, and impossible to stop once it starts. For months, I told myself I was done with the past, that I'd built something bigger, stronger, cleaner than the pain that made it. But the truth is, ghosts don't live in houses. They live in moments you refuse to unpack. Mine arrived on a quiet Sunday morning, in the form of a phone call I didn't expect. "Claire," Mom's voice trembled through the receiver. "It's your brother. He's not well." The room seemed to shrink around me. "What happened?" She hesitated. "He's in the hospital, overdose. They said he's stable, but..." Her voice broke. For a long time, I didn't speak. Part of me wanted to stay silent, to let consequence run its course. Another part, the one that still remembered our shared childhood laughter, couldn't move fast enough. "I'm on my way," I said finally. The hospital was cold, all sterile white and humming machines. When I reached the room, I almost didn't recognize him. Alex looked smaller, pale, his face drawn tight like a memory stretched too thin. Mom sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering something only mothers can. Dad stood by the window, staring out at nothing. When he saw me, his shoulders slumped, like relief hurt more than worry. "Claire," he said softly. I nodded. "How bad?" "He'll recover physically," Dad said. "But he's lost..." "He has been for a long time." I stepped closer. The monitors beeped rhythmically, a heartbeat for the broken. For years, I thought seeing him fall would make me feel justified. It didn't. It just made me tired. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked straight at me, disoriented, but clear enough to recognize the one person who never came running before. "Claire?" His voice cracked. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm here." He blinked slowly. "You didn't have to come." "Maybe not," I said. "But I did anyway." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You always were the good one." "No," I said. "I just learned how to clean up the mess you left behind." He looked away, shame flickering across his face. "Mom said you bought everything. The house, the company, the street, all of it." I nodded. "You made me lose everything once. I guess I just wanted to see what everything felt like." He closed his eyes. "And how does it feel?" I hesitated. "Heavy." We sat in silence for a long time, just the sound of the machines filling the space between us. Finally, he whispered, "I didn't mean to ruin things, Claire. I just kept thinking I could fix it." "One more gamble, one more deal." I interrupted him gently. "You were always chasing the next win. But you never realized some of us were betting on you." His eyes filled with tears. "I know. No, you don't," I said softly. "Because if you did, you would have stopped before we lost everything." He didn't argue. He just cried quietly, and for once I didn't feel anger. Just sadness, deep and unshakable. Maybe forgiveness isn't something you give. Maybe it's something that happens when you finally see the person who hurt you as human again. That night, I stayed in the hospital lobby after my parents went home. The lights dimmed, the world outside slept, and I just sat there watching the rain streak down the windows. Every drop looked like a memory sliding down glass. Brief, real, gone. I thought about the house, about the street, about the empire I'd built from pain. And suddenly it all felt small compared to this. A brother, fragile and broken, in a hospital bed. For years I told myself I was rebuilding for strength. But maybe, deep down, I was still trying to fix the one thing that couldn't be saved. The version of us that used to love each other without conditions. The next morning, Alex woke again. He looked better, weaker, but awake. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rough. I pulled up a chair. "Go ahead." He took a deep breath. "When Mom and Dad sold the house, it wasn't just for me. They didn't want to tell you this, but I asked them to do it. I begged them. I said I'd pay them back in a month. I thought I could double the money. My chest tightened. You asked them to sell it? He nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. They didn't want to, Claire. Dad said no. Mom cried. But I pushed. I told them you'd understand. He laughed bitterly. You shouldn't have. I stared at him for a long time, every old emotion rising. Betrayal, disbelief, grief. But beneath it all, something else stirred. Understanding, because suddenly it made sense. Not the act, but the fear behind it. He wasn't trying to destroy us. He was trying to be enough for once, and failed spectacularly. When I stood up to leave, he grabbed my wrist weakly. Claire, he whispered, do you hate me? I looked down at him, my brother, the architect of so much pain, but also the boy who used to fix my bike and steal cookies for me when Mom wasn't looking. No, I said quietly. I just don't need you to be sorry anymore. He frowned. Why not? Because I already forgave you, I said. I just didn't realize it until now. Outside, the morning light broke through the clouds. The rain had stopped. I walked to the parking lot, breathing in the clean air, and for the first time in years, I felt light. The kind of light that comes when you stop carrying someone else's guilt. I sat in my car, looked up at the sky, and whispered, I forgive you. Not for him. For me, that week, I visited my parents again. We sat on the porch in silence, sipping coffee like old times. Dad said quietly, You've changed. I smiled. No, I just stopped letting pain decorate my house. Mom reached over, squeezed my hand. We're proud of you. I know, I said softly. But I'm proud of us, because somehow after everything, we were still here. Still a family. Bent, but not broken. Later that night, I walked down Maple Street again. The lights glowed, kids' laughter echoed faintly in the distance, and the air smelled like lilacs again. I stopped in front of the old mailbox, freshly painted white, with Andrews written in bold blue letters. For years, that name had felt like a curse. Now it felt like a promise. I placed my hand on it gently and whispered, We made it home. And for once, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. They say success is the best revenge. I used to believe that, until I learned that peace is quieter and harder to earn. It had been 6 months since the hospital. Alex was in rehab now, sending letters once a week. At first, they were clumsy apologies, long, tangled paragraphs of regret and half-remembered memories. But lately, they'd become simpler, more honest, like he was learning to speak a language we'd both forgotten. Dear Claire, I planted a tree behind the center today. A maple like the one in our old yard. Thought you'd like that. That was all he wrote one week. And somehow it was enough. My parents were rebuilding too, in their own way. Dad had retired from what remained of his business. Mom started volunteering at a local shelter. She said helping other families find homes helped her forgive herself for losing ours. And me? I was finally learning what it meant to live in a house I didn't have to defend. On a clear April morning, I walked through Maple Heights, the street I now owned, the one that used to haunt me. Every house had a new story now. Kids rode bikes where I once cried in driveways. Lawns bloomed again. It didn't feel like the past anymore. It felt alive. As I reached my parents' home, now rented under my company's name, Mom was in the garden, trimming roses. She looked up and smiled. You came early. Yeah, I said. I wanted to see the light hit the porch like it used to. She nodded, then handed me a pair of gloves. Help me with these. They're overgrowing again. We worked in silence for a while. The smell of earth and lilac filled the air. It felt almost holy. 2 women, tending what time had nearly erased. After a while, Mom said quietly, You know, your father and I never asked why you bought the whole street. I wiped sweat from my brow. Because I needed to reclaim it. She tilted her head. From us? I smiled faintly. No, from the version of me who thought losing this place meant losing my worth. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. You were always stronger than you knew. No, I said softly. I just learned how to stop proving it. That afternoon, I stood in the middle of the street, sunlight on my face, the hum of life all around. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Andrews Properties, my own company. The title read, "Final title transfer approved. The last of the deeds, the entire block, officially under my name." I should have felt triumphant. But instead, I just felt still, because this wasn't victory anymore. It was closure. Later that evening, I drove to the old elementary school at the end of the block. The playground was rusted, the paint peeling, but the swing still moved when the wind picked up. I sat on one and pushed off lightly, the chains creaking with each sway. This was where Alex and I used to race after school, where we dared each other to jump mid-swing and land on our feet, where life still felt wide open. I took a deep breath. "You can rest now," I whispered to the ghosts, and for once they did. When I got home, a package was waiting on my porch. No return address. Just my name in handwriting I recognized, Alex's. Inside was a small framed photo. It was the two of us, ages 6 and 8, sitting on the porch steps with melting popsicles. Behind us, the maple tree towered in full summer bloom. On the back of the frame, he'd written, "For the girl who never stopped coming home, even when she left." I sat there for a long time, tears streaming quietly down my face. Not the kind that burn, the kind that heal. 2 weeks later, I did something no one expected. I called a press conference. It wasn't for publicity. It was for peace. When the reporters gathered, I stood outside Maple Heights Realty, my flagship office, and said simply, "This street built me twice. Once when I was a child, and again when I lost it. So today, I'm donating half of Maple Heights' profits to community housing. Because no child should have to learn self-worth through foreclosure." Flashbulbs went off. Reporters shouted questions. But I just smiled. Because the story wasn't mine alone anymore. That night, I returned home. Not to a mansion, but to a small restored cottage 2 blocks away. It had white walls, a quiet porch, and that same maple scent in the air. I'd planted one in the front yard last year. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the leaves dance in the wind. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own life. Sometimes I still think about the day they sold our home, how the sold sign looked like a verdict. But now I see it differently. Maybe that loss was never punishment. Maybe it was direction, a map to the life I was supposed to build. Because without that heartbreak, I never would have learned how to turn grief into growth. How to build walls that protect instead of isolate. How to love a place not for what it was, but for what it taught me to become. A week later, Alex called. He sounded stronger this time. "Hey, boss," he joked weakly. "Guess you really did buy the neighborhood," I laughed. "Guess I did," he paused. "Does it feel worth it?" I thought about the porch, the roses, the laughter echoing down the block. "Yeah," I said. "But not for the reasons you think." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said softly, "I want to come home when I'm ready." "You will," I told him. "It's waiting." That night, I wrote something in my journal. I hadn't done that in years. Revenge ends when you win. Healing begins when you stop keeping score. I closed the book, turned off the light, and listened to the sound of the wind through the maple leaves. It didn't sound like anger anymore. It sounded like life. A week later, I hosted a small neighborhood dinner. No cameras, no investors, just families, laughter, and food on folding tables. As the sun dipped low, I looked around at the street. The one they once sold. The one I reclaimed. The one that finally felt like home again. And as the lights twinkled and laughter filled the air, I whispered under my breath, "We're not just back. We're better." The wind picked up, soft, warm, alive. It carried that promise through the trees. Home wasn't something they could sell. It was something I built back inside myself, and this time, I wasn't leaving.